The art he made from nothing. Part 1. The Notebook. The notebook had been in the desk drawer for 2 years before he opened it. It was a standard composition notebook. Black and white marbled cover, 60 pages, the kind sold at drugstore counters for 30 cents. He had bought it in 1970, the year Wieland died, intending to do something with it that he could not quite articulate at the time, but that had the shape of something important. He had written his name on the inside cover and then had put it in the drawer and had not opened it again. In the autumn of 1972, a Sunday morning with the dojo empty and the light through the east window at its particular October quality, warm and horizontal, and making everything it touched look both ordinary and significant, Chuck took the notebook out of the drawer and set it on the desk and sat with it for a while before opening it. He was 32 years old. He had been teaching Tang Soo Do for 9 years. He had been competing for 8 years and winning consistently for 4, and he had retired undefeated in 1974. This, he projected, sitting with the notebook in 1972, was still 2 years away. He had been studying martial arts since 1959, 13 years of direct study under instructors, indirect study through competition and sparring, and the specific kind of learning that happens when you fight someone who is genuinely trying to beat you and you understand in the process why they are doing what they are doing. 13 years. He opened the notebook and wrote one sentence at the top of the first page. What do I actually know? He had studied under 4 instructors of substance, in 2 countries, in 3 distinct traditions. Park Sung-jin, the Korean master who had changed the direction of his life at Osan. The training at March Air Force Base, under an American instructor with a Japanese background, who taught a hybrid system that reflected his own complicated relationship to 2 martial cultures. The years in Los Angeles, where he had studied with and trained alongside practitioners of a dozen different systems. The tournament circuit brought them all into the same rooms, and the people worth learning from were obvious in the same way that clear water is obvious. And Bruce Lee, with whom he had trained for 2 years in the backyard in Culver City, which had been less a formal instruction than an extended dialogue between 2 practitioners of comparable but different development, each offering the other something the other did not have. He wrote this down, not as a summary but as an inventory, specific things he had learned from each source, specific techniques and principles and ways of thinking about the body and its movement and its relationship to an opponent's body and movement. He wrote for an hour and covered 4 pages with close, steady handwriting. When he stopped, he looked at what he had written. Then he looked at it again with the specific quality of attention he brought to things he was trying to see accurately rather than confirm. He was looking for the pattern, not the content. The content was techniques and principles, each attributable to a source, each occupying its particular place in the taxonomy of martial arts knowledge that 13 years had accumulated. He was looking for what ran through the content, underneath it, connecting it. He found it on the 3rd reading. Every significant thing he had learnt across 4 instructors and 3 traditions and 13 years could be reduced to a single underlying principle, which expressed itself differently in each context, but which was, in its essence, the same thing. He wrote it at the bottom of page 4, underlined. The technique is not the point. The technique is the delivery mechanism for an understanding of what is happening between 2 bodies in a contested space. He sat with this for a long time. Then he started a new page. Part 2. The problem with copsing. He had taught Tang Soo Do for 9 years because Tang Soo Do was what he had learnt and what he had mastered sufficiently to teach. This was the appropriate logic of a martial arts instructor. You teach what you know, you represent your lineage honestly, you don't invent what you haven't earned. But there was a problem he had been carrying for several years that the notebook was now forcing him to articulate. Tang Soo Do was a Korean martial art. It had been developed in a specific cultural context, informed by a specific history, shaped by specific bodies and specific opponents and specific circumstances. It was a real and complete system, and Park Sung-jin had taught it to him with the full weight of its reality and completeness. Chuck had received it as such. He had competed in it, won in it, taught it, but he was an American from Oklahoma. He was 32 years old, and he had grown up in a specific cultural context, informed by a specific history, shaped by specific bodies and specific circumstances. And what he had learned from 13 years of training across multiple systems was that the most effective martial art was not the one that was most faithfully reproduced from its original source, but the one that was most honestly adapted to the actual human being who was doing it. He wrote, Park Sung-jin's Tang Soo Do was perfect for Park Sung-jin, not because it was the only system that would have worked for him, but because it was the system he had developed in relationship with his own body, his own opponents, his own context. I have been teaching it as though it is the only system that will work for my students. That's wrong. He stopped, looked at what he had written, then added, and I've been competing in it as though it is the only system that can win. That's also not quite right. What has been winning is the understanding I've accumulated, the principle underneath the technique. The technique has been Tang Soo Do. The principle is something else, something I don't have a name for yet. He got up and went to the equipment room and got a glass of water and came back and sat down. Then he wrote, what if I built the system from the principle instead of from the techniques? Part 3. The year of writing. Over the following year, Chuck did something he had not done before in his teaching life. He wrote, not for publication, not for students, not for any external purpose. He wrote the way a person writes when they are trying to think through something that cannot be thought through by any other method, the specific process of putting words on paper that forces the mind to produce clarity about things it has been holding in a comfortable vagueness. He wrote about technique, about which techniques he had retained from each system he had studied, and why each of those techniques had survived the test of competition and the test of teaching, and what the surviving techniques had in common with each other that the discarded techniques did not. He wrote about what he had observed in students over 9 years of teaching, what kinds of instruction produced genuine understanding versus what kinds produced competent mimicry, which was a different and lesser thing. He wrote about the 10 losses and what each of them had actually taught him and what the underlying pattern of their teaching turned out to be. He wrote about Wieland, not directly, not about his brother's death or the grief or the weight of that June afternoon in 1970 when the tournament loudspeaker had called his name and the world had changed. He wrote about what he had done with the training in the year after Wieland died, which was that he had carried Wieland into the sessions, had made the training an act of honoring a belief rather than proving a capability, and he had discovered in doing that the training worked differently from that position. That the technique was unchanged, but the intention behind it was different, and that the different intention produced a different quality of movement, and that the different quality of movement was more effective than what he had been doing before. He wrote, the body produces its best work when the intention behind the work is not about the body. The best technique is not made by thinking about technique. It is made by thinking about something the technique is in service of. He had understood this for years in fragments. Writing it down made it whole. He wrote about Bruce Lee, about the 2 years in the Culver City backyard, which had been the most intellectually rigorous martial arts education he had received, because Lee was the only teacher he had encountered who was operating from the same direction as the question Chuck was now working toward, building a practice from principle rather than from tradition. They had disagreed during those 2 years about specific things, about the role of high kicks, about the value of structured forms versus free-flowing response, about what a practitioner owed to the tradition that had formed them versus what they were permitted to take from the tradition and adapt. He wrote, Lee was right about more than he was wrong about. What he was wrong about was the degree to which tradition constrains. What he was right about was the degree to which principle liberates. He built Jeet Kune Do from the question, what actually works for this body in this situation against this opponent? I am asking the same question. My answer will be different from his because I am a different body, from a different context, with different opponents and different students. Part 4. The conversation with Ray Medina. His assistant instructor, Ray Medina, had been with the school since 1963, 9 years of partnership, of the specific kind of professional relationship that develops between people who are genuinely committed to the same thing and who have worked together long enough to have established an efficient mutual understanding. Chuck showed him the notebook on a Saturday morning in late 1973, after the last class of the week. He handed it across the desk without introduction and said, "Read this. Tell me what you think." Ray took the notebook and read for 20 minutes in silence. He was a careful reader, not slow but thorough, the kind of reading that goes back over things rather than proceeding straight through. When he finished, he set the notebook on the desk and looked at Chuck. "You're describing a system," he said. "I know," Chuck said. "A system you've been practicing for 13 years without having a name for it," Ray said. "Yes, and now you want to name it." "I want to make it explicit," Chuck said. "Teach it as a coherent thing, rather than as a collection of techniques from various traditions that I've assembled based on what works." Ray looked at the notebook. "The techniques in here, they come from Tang Soo Do, Shotokan, some Judo, some Jiu-Jitsu, a few things that are from nowhere specific. From competition," Chuck said, "from watching what actually works against opponents who are trying their best to not let it work. And from Lee," Ray said. He had been at the school when Lee trained with Chuck in the Culver City backyard. He had observed some of those sessions. "From Lee," Chuck confirmed. Ray was quiet for a moment. "The problem with naming a system," he said, "is that once you name it, people will try to own it, to control it, to say it's this and not that, and that anyone practicing it wrong is practicing it wrong by your definition." He paused. Lee had this problem. Every person who studied Jeet Kune Do had a different idea of what Jeet Kune Do was, and some of them became adversarial about the differences. "I know," Chuck said. "I've thought about that." He paused. "The answer is to build it in a way that names the principle rather than the technique. If the principle is clear, the technique is secondary. You can't have a schism over technique if the system doesn't require any specific technique." Ray looked at him. "How do you name a principle?" "I'm working on that," Chuck said. Part 5. The name. He came to it not through deliberation but through the accumulated pressure of the question. He had been considering various possibilities, names that referenced his lineage, his teachers, his nationality, the specific combination of systems he had drawn from. None of them felt right, and when he examined why none of them felt right, he arrived at the same understanding. They were all names for what the system was made of. He did not want a name for what it was made of. He wanted a name for what it was. What it was, what the year of notebooks and the conversations and the 9 years of teaching had clarified, was a system built around a single proposition that every person who trains in a martial art is building their own version of the practice, and that the task of the instructor is to provide the principles that allow each student to build the most honest and effective version of themselves, rather than the most accurate replica of the instructor. He was thinking about this on a Tuesday morning in 1974, driving from the house to the dojo along Hawthorne Boulevard at 5:15 in the early gray of a Southern California autumn. He was thinking about what the name should communicate, and he was thinking about a Korean phrase, Chun Kuk, which translated roughly as the universal code or the way of the universal. that he had encountered during his training years and that had stayed with him for reasons he had not fully examined. He sat at a red light on Hawthorne and thought about it. Chun Kuk Do, the way of the universal code, not a Korean name for a Korean system, a Korean phrase for a principle that transcended any single tradition. The way was not the technique, it was the orientation, the direction, the thing that all the techniques were in service of. He drove the rest of the way to the dojo. He sat at his desk. He opened the notebook to a new page and wrote at the top, Chun Kuk Do. And then, for the first time, he wrote what it meant, not the techniques, not the heritage, but the principle underneath everything. He wrote for 2 hours without stopping, in the concentrated flow of someone who has been building toward something for long enough that the building finally reaches the point where it can speak for itself. When he stopped, he read what he had written. He had written a system. Part 6, the first class. He taught the first Chun Kuk Do class on a Saturday morning in October 1974. He did not announce it as a new system. He did not tell the students beforehand that what they were about to receive was different from what they had been receiving. He simply taught differently, from the principle rather than from the technique, describing what each movement was for rather than how to do it, asking questions rather than giving instructions, creating the conditions in which each student was building their own understanding rather than reproducing his. He watched the class with the specific quality of attention he brought to things he was uncertain about, not the comfortable attention of the familiar, but the open attention of someone who is genuinely waiting to see what will happen. What happened was better, not dramatically better, not in ways that an outside observer would have noticed as a departure from the previous class, but better in the specific way that Chuck had been working toward. The quality of understanding in the room was different, and the quality of understanding produced different kinds of movement, and the different kinds of movement had the specific quality he had been describing in the notebook for 2 years: honest, efficient, individual. After the class, Ray Medina stood at the edge of the floor and looked at Chuck with the expression of someone confirming something. "That was different," he said. "Yes," Chuck said. "What are we calling it?" "Chun Kuk Do," Chuck said. Ray tried the phrase. "What does it mean?" "The way of the universal code," Chuck said. "The idea that every person who trains is working toward their own complete expression of the principles, not a copy of mine, not a copy of their instructors. Theirs." He looked at the students dispersing into the parking lot. "The system is a set of principles. What each student makes of them is their own." Ray looked at the parking lot. "Bruce Lee said something like that," he said. "He did," Chuck said. "He was right." "You've added something he didn't have," Ray said. "What?" "The teaching framework," Ray said. "Lee knew how to practice it. You've built a way to teach it." He paused. "That's the harder thing, EPI logo, what the notebook became." Chuck taught Chun Kuk Do for the rest of his career. Not exclusively. The school's curriculum had depth and breadth, drawing from multiple traditions, and he was always careful to honor the lineages that had made his own knowledge possible. But the organizing principle that ran through everything he taught, from the first Torrance class to the eventual growth of the system into a formal curriculum with ranks and requirements and instructors trained in its specific approach, the organizing principle was always what the notebook had said. The technique is not the point. The technique is the delivery mechanism for an understanding of what is happening between two bodies in a contested space. He had arrived at this understanding through 13 years of training, 2 years of competition losing, 6 years of undefeated competition, 9 years of teaching, 2 years of writing, and 1 year of carrying Whelan's name into the 5 o'clock sessions and discovering that intention changes what the technique can do. It was a lot of material to distill into a single sentence. Most things are. The notebook stayed in the desk drawer for the rest of his life at the Torrance dojo. He looked at it occasionally. not to review it, because he knew its contents the way you know the dimensions of a room you have lived in for decades, without reference and without effort. He looked at it because it was the record of the making of something, and the making of something was the thing he valued most about his working life. Not the product, but the process. Not the system, but the act of distilling the principle from the accumulated experience. The students who eventually earned black belts in Chun Kuk Do numbered in the thousands. Each of them received the same principles. Each of them made something different with them, which was what the principles required. Each of their different somethings was, in the specific and non-metaphorical sense, an extension of the process that had begun on a Sunday morning in October 1972, when a 32-year-old man sat down with a composition notebook and asked himself a single question: what do I actually know? The answer had turned out to be both more and less than he expected, more in its depth, less in its breadth. He knew one thing, deeply in many forms. The forms were the techniques. The thing was the principle. He had made an art from that single thing. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything.